In front of 73,000 people and millions more holding their breath across live streams, Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She raised the truth. Kanye West had summoned her onto his stage, claiming unity, preaching revolution. But when she calmly unfolded a single black folder, the lights in that stadium changed forever. $10 million. Promised. Vanished. A girl who never got her scholarship. A crowd that expected fireworks and instead got silence sharper than any scream. It wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning between a man who weaponized noise and a woman who walked through fire without ever lifting her volume. And when it ended, she didn't look back. No victory lap, no raised fists. Just the quiet weight of justice, carried without applause. But the story didn't begin in that arena. It began 2 weeks earlier, with an email Jasmine was never meant to answer and an invitation no one expected her to accept. The email hit her inbox at 2:13 a.m. A single line in the subject, "Reclaim the culture, keynote request." Jasmine Crockett squinted at the screen, half asleep, thinking it was spam or satire. But as she scrolled, her breath caught. The sender was verified. The signature at the bottom read, Donda Enterprises Media Division, and attached was a glossy PDF outlining a massive, nationally televised summit hosted by none other than Kanye West. The name of the event? Reclaim the Culture, a Future Beyond the System. Its mission? To unite influential Black voices for a conversation on freedom, faith, and the future. And in the list of speakers, sandwiched between entertainers, athletes, and crypto influencers, sat one name that didn't fit the tone or the crowd. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Texas. She stared at the glowing screen in silence. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her chief of staff. "Is this for real?" She didn't answer. She was too busy rereading the part that said, broadcast globally across Fox Nation, Revolt, and Peacock. Jasmine Crockett was used to conflict. But this wasn't Congress. This was Kanye. By sunrise, the invite had leaked. Social media erupted. Nana Y. Crockett started trending before she even got her coffee. Twitter timelines turned into battlegrounds. Why would she legitimize this, some asked. Kanye called slavery a choice and wore a MAGA hat to the Grammys. Crockett's too smart to fall for this clout grab. She'll destroy him on stage. Supporters, skeptics, and cynics all weighed in, but no one had an answer. Even her own team was split. One aide said it would stain her reputation. Another whispered, "What if this is your moment to break the algorithm from the inside?" She didn't reply to any of it. Instead, she opened her closet, pulled down an old folder marked Community Uplift 2017, and flipped through photos of youth centers, eviction protests, and the bruised hands of elderly voters she once helped register. Then she stared at her grandmother's church bulletin, one that once read, "Silence is not peace." That afternoon, she sat at the edge of the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C., coat buttoned tight against the wind, watching tourists pass by as if history didn't ache beneath every step. She thought of Brianna, of Elijah, of George. She thought about how quickly the world moved on, unless someone forced it to stop and look. She didn't admire Kanye. She didn't trust his motives. But the truth was cruel. More young people were quoting his Sunday service than quoting Frederick Douglass. And if this circus was going to roll across every screen in America, she wasn't going to let it roll without her voice in the mix. Her decision didn't come with a speech. No press conference, no tweet storm, just a call. "Tell them I'll come," she told her assistant, "but I'm not coming to entertain. I'm coming to interrupt." That night, producers from the event FaceTimed her from a control room in L.A., giddy and breathless. "We're honored to have you, Congresswoman. Just a quick note. Kanye likes to keep things unscripted. Very raw, very real." Jasmine smiled thinly. "That's fine. Real's what I do." By the next morning, major headlines exploded. Kanye West invites Jasmine Crockett to speak. Culture war incoming? Crockett accepts Kanye invite. Sellout or strategist? Congress meets chaos. Jasmine Crockett faces the easy doctrine. Her office line wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted statements. Donors wanted reassurance. And even some fellow progressives warned her, he's going to use you. He wants legitimacy. But Jasmine already knew that. This wasn't about Kanye. It was about the millions who were still deciding what freedom sounded like. And if she didn't show up, someone else would stand in her place. Probably someone who looked like her, but spoke only in rehearsed slogans and sponsor-safe soundbites. At 6 p.m. that evening, Jasmine sat alone in her apartment, the blinds half drawn, her laptop playing a replay of Kanye's 2018 TMZ interview. There he was, chest puffed, voice rising, declaring, "When you hear about slavery for 400 years, for 400 years, that sounds like a choice." The host's face froze in disbelief. A staffer tried to cut the feed, and Kanye kept talking. Jasmine paused the clip. She rewound. She listened again. This wasn't just a gaffe. It was a philosophy of provocation, and she knew the danger of it. Not because she feared being shouted down, but because millions had come to believe that volume meant vision. She opened a blank notepad on her desk. At the top, she typed, "If you want to talk about the future of Black America, start by learning her name." She didn't write anything else. The sky above Atlanta that morning looked like it had been brushed with ash. Thick, low clouds hung above the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, casting a gray veil over the stadium's mirrored panels. But inside, the atmosphere was anything but muted. Tens of thousands of people had already begun to pour in by 9 a.m., draped in Yeezy apparel, protest shirts, designer suits, vintage Malcolm X hoodies. They came not just for the concert or the spectacle. They came for the confrontation, something unscripted, something raw. They came because America's two most unpredictable voices, one from the mic, the other from the hill, were about to collide live. Camera cranes hovered above the crowd like predatory birds. CNN's political unit had set up a live booth near Gate C while Fox News reported from the opposite end, treating the event like it was a campaign rally. TMZ live streamed from backstage. MSNBC aired a countdown timer. Even foreign outlets like BBC and Al Jazeera were present, jockeying for angles. "This isn't just a summit," one analyst whispered on air. "It's a culture referendum, a reckoning in real time." A nation, divided, polarized, exhausted, was watching. Not with popcorn, but with clenched jaws and curled fists. Because this wasn't just about Kanye or Crockett. It was about what Black leadership meant and who had the right to claim it. But before Jasmine could even speak a word, the rules of engagement changed. 24 hours before showtime, a clip leaked online. Grainy, off-air footage pulled from what looked like a backstage podcast months earlier. Kanye, seated with a group of influencers, leaned forward and said with a smirk, "Jasmine Crockett, that's a puppet in a suit. She doesn't move unless Pelosi pulls the strings." He chuckled. The room laughed. And the moment, once buried in digital oblivion, now set fire to the internet. The backlash was instant. Screenshots of the clip flooded Twitter, TikTok, Instagram within minutes. "A puppet," one tweet read, "says the man who called slavery a choice and then begged Trump for attention." Hashtag #. Puppet in a suit trended within an hour. But it wasn't just used against Kanye. Trolls, political agitators, and burner accounts used it to drag Jasmine too, framing her as a plant, a token, a face carefully selected to make institutions look progressive. The duality was sharp, toxic. Every reply to her last tweet was venom. Every DM she received that night, filled with gifs, threats, and snake emojis. But Jasmine didn't blink. No tweet, no press conference, no angry live stream or rebuttal interview. She sat still, watched the storm rise, and let the silence thicken. And in that stillness, America grew louder. News anchors debated her silence. Is it strength or cowardice? Conservative blogs accused her of preparing a hit job. Liberal voices urged her to withdraw. This is a trap. Meanwhile, Gen Z influencers speculated about a mic drop moment. Even people in her own party sent cautious texts. "You still sure about this?" But Jasmine replied to none of them. Because this wasn't about damage control, it was about discipline. At 11:02 a.m., the motorcade pulled up behind the stadium. The crowd outside roared as camera shutters erupted. Jasmine stepped out. Not in designer heels or sleek campaign fashion, but in a pair of flat black boots, a navy blazer, and a white blouse with the initials JMC stitched in cursive near the cuff. No entourage. Just her and her longtime aide, Marcus, who leaned in one last time and whispered, "Remember, the mic doesn't make the message." She nodded once. The door closed behind her. Inside, the chaos hummed. Kanye was already pacing backstage, draped in a floor-length white trench coat with God's vision scrawled in silver across the back. Someone handed him a mic. Another person handed him a Red Bull. The vibe was less political summit, more rap battle in a Roman Colosseum. One of the stage techs glanced nervously at Jasmine as she walked past and muttered, "You ready for this?" She didn't break stride. "I was born ready. He just got famous first." The arena lights dimmed. A single spotlight cut through the rafters like a blade, illuminating the stage where two chairs sat across from each other, angled like a boxing ring with no ropes. A bass hum filled the air. And then the voiceover. "Two paths. One question. Who leads our future?" The crowd erupted. Kanye stepped out first, arms raised, basking in the chaos. He circled the stage once, nodding like a preacher preparing for battle. And then, Jasmine. She didn't walk out fast. She didn't smile or wave. She just moved, deliberate and unshaken, her eyes locked forward like a witness refusing to flinch in a courtroom. The cheers were mixed now. Applause, boos, whistles, phone flashes. Someone shouted, "Sell out." Someone else yelled, "Queen." Jasmine kept walking until she reached the center, until she sat down, until the entire country couldn't look away. And still, she hadn't spoken a word. The lights didn't dim. They collapsed. The stadium was swallowed in darkness for 3 full seconds. And in that breathless void, a low-frequency bass began to rumble through the floor, crawling up spines, vibrating against rib cages like a warning. Then in a burst of white-gold glare, the entire stage ignited with strobes. Massive LED screens flared to life, showing fragmented images of black icons, Malcolm, MLK, Nina Simone, intercut with slow-motion footage of protests, church choirs, gold chains, and Kanye himself, arms outstretched in silhouette, crowned in red light like a prophet of contradiction. The music was thunderous, tribal, digital, half gospel, half apocalypse. And then it all stopped. Silence. And then Kanye West walked out alone. The crowd detonated. Screams, cheers, a few boos laced in like poison threads. But no one sat. Not a single soul. He didn't need to say anything yet. His presence alone was a monologue. Dressed in a sleeveless black tunic, leather gloves, and combat boots, he paced slowly toward center stage like a general surveying a battlefield. Spotlights followed his every move, and the cameras cut close enough to catch the glint in his eyes. He raised his mic with one hand, palm open with the other, and the stadium hushed itself like a congregation. "We've been controlled for too long," he said, his voice steady, low, theatrical. "We've been sold, packaged, shaped into what they wanted us to be. They gave us leaders that didn't lead, just faces that kept the gates locked." He paused and the silence thickened. "It's time," he continued, "to break free, not from the system, but from the representatives of the system." The crowd roared. Not all of it, but enough. And the roar wasn't pure. It was jagged, some celebratory, some combative. He didn't name her. He didn't need to. Everyone in the stadium, and everyone watching from home, knew exactly who he meant. He smiled faintly, letting the implication bloom across the screen. The camera panned to Jasmine, seated stage left, still silent, her face lit by the cold light of the screens behind him. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her gaze, but her hands, resting neatly on her lap, clenched just slightly. Kanye turned to the main screen behind him. A single name blinked in stark white font: Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, and beneath it, in smaller text, "Special guest, dialogue or division." The audience reacted instantly and violently divided. One half rose in applause, shouting her name, clapping furiously. The other half booed. Loud, long. Piercing whistles joined the backlash, like razors slicing through the cheers. Someone screamed, "Traitor!" Another yelled, "Tell the truth, Queen!" It was no longer a crowd. It was a courtroom, a battleground, a confessional booth where half the congregation wanted forgiveness and the other wanted blood. Jasmine rose, not abruptly, not with swagger. She stood the way a soldier stands after the horn of battle sounds, slowly, methodically, with weight in every inch of her spine. Her boots hit the steps of the stage with a metallic thud, too sharp to be drowned out by the noise. She didn't gesture to the crowd. She didn't wave. She walked straight across the black mat floor toward the center chair, opposite Kanye, like it was her seat in judgment. One step, then another, then another. Kanye didn't look at her, not yet. He watched the crowd, basked in it, shaped it with the rise and fall of his breath. When Jasmine reached her chair and sat, the house lights rose slightly, enough for the cameras to frame them both, side by side, face to face. Two storms in human form. The moderator, a thin man in a tailored burgundy suit, emerged from the shadows, clipboard in hand, earpiece crackling. He looked like a pawn misplaced on a chessboard of giants. "Welcome, everyone," he began, voice shaky. "Tonight we witness an open conversation on identity, legacy, leadership, and who we trust to carry us forward." Kanye tilted his mic. "Don't call it leadership," he interrupted smoothly. "Call it ownership. Leadership implies someone else's leash." Jasmine didn't move, but her voice cut cleanly across the mic. "And ownership implies a kingdom. Whose crown are you wearing exactly?" The audience gasped. Kanye turned toward her slowly, like a dragon uncoiling. Finally, he looked her in the eye. And for the first time, the mask slipped for a split second. The corner of his jaw twitched. He wasn't ready for her to strike first. "Let's begin," the moderator stammered, glancing between them, already sweating. But the stage was already alive. There was no warm-up, no small talk, no mutual nod of respect. The moment the moderator gave the floor to Kanye, he leaned forward with the hunger of a man who had rehearsed his war lines in the mirror for months. The spotlight tightened around him. The crowd quieted. He didn't need notes. He had fire, and he lit it without hesitation. "You don't represent us," Kanye said, eyes locked on Jasmine. "You represent the machine that's been feeding off our communities for decades. You show up in our churches, shake hands during election season, post some photo in a hoodie, and then vote exactly how the system tells you. You're not a leader, Jasmine. You're a brand ambassador for oppression dressed up in power suits." The crowd gasped, then roared. One half cheered like they were at a heavyweight fight, and Kanye had just landed the first punch. The other half shouted over the noise, yelling, "Sit down and let her speak." Phones flew into the air. Live stream surged. Kanye Bashir's Crockett shot into Twitter's top trends within 60 seconds. Somewhere backstage, producers scrambled to add extra servers. The internet was catching fire. And in the middle of it, Jasmine sat, hands folded, eyes steady, unmoved by the storm surrounding her. She waited for the noise to simmer down, not with impatience, but with precision. Then she picked up her mic and spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clear, measured, like a woman who had nothing to prove, but everything to defend. "If you think volume is proof of freedom," she said, "then you've never lived through the kind of silence that's forced down your throat when your rent is overdue. Your son's stopped by police and your vote is suppressed before you even arrive at the booth." The stadium fell quiet, for a breath, two, then erupted again. But this time, the sound wasn't wild. It was conflicted, disoriented, because she didn't match Kanye's fire with fire. She matched it with stone. And somehow that silence hit louder than any beat drop. Kanye chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "So now you're the voice of the streets?" he sneered. "Tell me, when was the last time you went door to door in the South Side? When was the last time you stood in the line at the shelter you post about in campaign ads?" Jasmine tilted her head slightly, then answered. "Last Thanksgiving, and again the week after. I stood in the rain handing out diapers to a grandmother raising 4 kids because her daughter was incarcerated for stealing formula." "You want to question my memory, Kanye? Let's compare diaries." Gas rippled across the crowd. A beat later, applause. Kanye raised a hand like a conductor, calming the room. They want you to clap for that, he said, gesturing toward her. They want you to believe that charity equals change. But what has Congress actually done for our people? What laws did you pass that stopped a single bullet from hitting a single black boy's back? She didn't blink. Not enough, she said plainly, because the system you say I serve wasn't built to save us. It was built to survive us. But I'm not inside it because I trust it. I'm inside it to tear it down from within. The audience froze. Even Kanye paused. It wasn't what he expected. He wanted defensiveness. He got defiance. He wanted a politician. He got a street-hardened strategist who knew exactly where the cracks in the marble were and how to use them. Up in the booth, MSNBC's live stream shot past 2.3 million viewers. TikTok reposts of Jasmine's line flooded in. Tear it down from within became an instant meme. But she wasn't smiling. She wasn't basking. She was locked in, a woman under siege, but never off balance. Kanye stood from his chair, walked a slow circle around her. See, that's the trick, he said, pointing down. They send someone who looks like us, talks like us, but speaks their language. You are what the system made to quiet the rest of us down. You are the deep state in a dress. That one stung. Gasps again. Murmurs. A few jeers. Jasmine looked up at him and finally stood. Slowly. Her posture didn't change. Just her altitude. If I'm part of the deep state, she said coldly, then I must be doing a terrible job, because I still get death threats from white supremacists and messages from your fan base telling me I should smile more. I wear a suit, yes, but you know what I don't wear, Kanye? A mask, the line sliced clean. No theatrics, no screaming, just sharp truth, bared like a scalpel. The moderator said nothing. He didn't dare interrupt. Even Kanye didn't speak right away, because in that moment, it wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. The room should have been electric, but something colder had seeped in. After Jasmine's last line, even the raucous crowd had simmered into a hush. Not from peace, but from tension so thick it curled at the edges of every breath. Kanye paced with more stiffness now. He circled the stage like a wolf, suddenly unsure if it had cornered prey or if it had walked into a trap. Jasmine didn't move. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers interlaced, eyes locked ahead like a woman counting down to detonation. Then in one smooth motion, she reached beneath her chair and pulled out a plain black folder. No logos, no fanfare, just weight. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps. Camera phones raised again. On Twitter, clips of the folder moment hit 200K views before she even opened it. Kanye stopped pacing. His gaze dropped to her hands. What's that? He said, voice quieter now. Less confrontational, more alert. Jasmine stood, the mic in one hand, the folder in the other. You talk about ownership, she said calmly, about being free from the system. But what happens when the system isn't the enemy? You are. She flipped open the folder and held up a copy of a grant document. This is from Donda Futures, she continued, a music and mentorship nonprofit Kanye launched in Chicago 3 years ago. Promised scholarships, promised studio access, promised community reinvestment. The crowd murmured. A few clapped, but most just watched, held hostage by the shift in tone. Jasmine turned toward the massive LED screens behind them. Can we get the budget projection? She asked. The screen flickered, then blinked to life. It showed a spreadsheet, detailed, damning, precise. Column after column, listing expenditures. $2.6 million for consulting, $900,000 for creative direction, $370,000 for travel and inspiration retreats. But beneath all that, under a highlighted red row, sat one damning figure. Scholarship disbursement to students. $0, 0 cents. The stadium fell silent. No music, no echo, just raw air and the sharp ache of collective realization. Jasmine let the moment breathe. Then, you raised $10 million. You promised hope, and not a single dollar reached the classrooms you used in your promo videos. She turned slowly to face him. You want to talk about who's a puppet? At least I know who I'm accountable to. Do you? Kanye's jaw tightened. His body stilled. This wasn't a jab. This was an indictment, and the crowd could feel it. He took one step forward. You dug this up to win? He asked, his voice low, tight. You really came here with a file like that, just to make headlines, just to humiliate me. Jasmine's reply was immediate, ice cold, clean, and lethal. I didn't come here to win, she said. I came here to illuminate. The words didn't echo. They landed like thunder. You could see it in the way heads turned, phones trembled, even security guards on the sidelines leaned in. The moderator looked paralyzed. The producers backstage were yelling into headsets, trying to decide whether to cut or ride the viral wave. Jasmine walked over to the screen, tapped the red highlighted row. Every dollar you withheld, she said, was a stolen opportunity. A kid who skipped college, a mother who kept working double shifts, a young producer who never got their shot. She stepped back, folder still open. And you have the audacity to call me the system? Kanye didn't respond right away. His eyes scanned the screen, as if trying to mentally erase the evidence through willpower alone. He licked his lips, searched for something, defense, justification, fury, but nothing came, because the truth was brutal, and it didn't blink. Jasmine lowered the folder. This isn't about cancel culture, it's about accountability. If you say you speak for the people, then the people deserve to see your receipts. Somewhere deep in the stands, applause began again. Slow, unsure, like a match being struck in the dark. But it grew. Row by row, it rose until half the stadium was on its feet. The other half, still seated, shocked, betrayed, reeling. This wasn't the show they thought they came for, but it was the reckoning they couldn't look away from. Kanye finally lifted his mic, voice hoarse. So you're the hero now? He muttered. You came to church just to drag a man through the mud? Jasmine turned, eyes sharp. I didn't drag you. I unmasked you. And if you don't want the dirt seen, maybe next time, don't build your altar in it. Silence again. Except this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with consequence. The arena had fallen into a strange kind of silence. Not the anticipatory hush before an explosion, but the heavy quiet that follows truth too sharp to ignore. Kanye still stood stiffly near the center of the stage, staring at the screen behind him as if the data might suddenly vanish. Jasmine hadn't moved from her mark. The folder was closed now, but the damage had been done. Or perhaps, more accurately, the clarity had arrived. Still, the crowd hadn't left. They hadn't turned off the live stream. They just waited. And in that raw pause, Jasmine took a breath, slower, deeper, and let the weight of what was coming settle on her shoulders. She raised her mic again, voice soft but steady. I wasn't going to say this, she said. I thought maybe it didn't belong tonight, but maybe it's the only thing that does. The screens behind them faded to black. No more spreadsheets, no flashy graphics, just darkness. I remember the day, she continued, May 26th, 2020, the morning after the world saw what it wasn't supposed to survive seeing. I flew to Minneapolis without cameras, without press. I went to the corner of 38th and Chicago, where the pavement was still stained, where the air still smelled like burning rubber and rage, where the candles hadn't stopped flickering even in the wind. The crowd didn't make a sound. I stood there with Roxy, she said, George Floyd's mother. She held my wrist like she was trying to anchor herself to something that wouldn't collapse. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She just whispered one question over and over. Did he know I loved him? Jasmine paused. Her throat caught for a second, but she pushed through. And when I saw her hands trembling, she said, when I saw the folded photo she kept in her coat pocket, George is a little boy, missing a tooth, holding a football, I realized something no press release could teach me. This wasn't just injustice. It was desecration. And when we speak about it, when we invoke names like his, we are standing on sacred ground. She turned slowly to face Kanye. And yet, she said, her voice tightening like a fist around a knife, you told the world that George Floyd didn't die from that officer's knee. You called it fentanyl. You repeated what white supremacists said behind closed doors. And you said it loud, with a smile, like truth was something you could remix. The words sliced clean through the air. Kanye's eyes narrowed. I was speaking from what I read, he said defensively. I wasn't trying to. You weren't trying? Jasmine snapped. You have 40 million followers. You speak and people echo. You tweet and kids quote you. And you told them that what we saw with our own eyes, what broke a mother and shook a country, was a lie. She shook her head. You didn't just spit on his grave. You turned it into a stage. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. A man behind her bowed his head. The entire arena shifted, not physically but emotionally. It sagged under the truth. Jasmine's tone changed. Not soft, but full, deep. I didn't come here tonight to fight, she said. I came because I believe in second chances. I believe in redemption. But redemption without accountability is just arrogance wrapped in poetry. She stepped forward. You say you speak for us, but where were you when the mothers were burying their sons? Where were you when we marched with blistered feet and burning lungs? Where were you when Roxy Floyd cried in a motel hallway because she couldn't bear to go home without hearing her boy's voice again? Kanye didn't speak. Jasmine let the silence hang. And the next time you say George Floyd's name, she finished, make sure you say it with the reverence of someone who stood where he fell. Because I did. The crowd was frozen, not out of confusion, out of awe, out of reckoning, out of the discomfort that only comes when someone finally dares to speak the part no one else is willing to touch. The camera caught Kanye's face. Something had changed. His expression wasn't rage now. It was smaller, tighter, a flinch in the corner of his mouth. Not guilt, not quite, but recognition that he had just been stripped, not by a rival, but by a witness. And America was still watching. It started with a twitch in his jaw, the kind of tension that brews beneath a boiling surface long before it spills. Kanye had been pacing again, slow at first but with the coiled energy of a man trying to hold back a scream. The lights above the stage felt hotter now, the cameras more intrusive, and the silence in the stadium more unbearable. Jasmine stood still, unmoving, composed, as if daring him to break the spell of restraint he had barely clung to since the moment she unfolded that folder. And then he snapped. You think this is helping? He roared, voice cracking through the mic like a gunshot. You think dragging me through the dirt on national television builds us up? You're not fighting for the people. You're fighting for headlines, for white validation. You're tearing down a black man who tried to change the game. His voice thundered, not just angry, but wounded, raw, desperate. He pointed directly at her. You are the reason we can't have unity. You are the reason we stay divided. A ripple shot through the crowd. Some cheered, but many winced. Others lowered their phones, unsure of what they were witnessing. This wasn't swagger. This was a man unraveling in real time, his words louder than his conviction. And through it all, Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't react. She just stared at him, like someone watching a dam crack from across the shore. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, too calm, and that, more than anything, cut through the air like a scalpel. Do you know, she asked quietly, who really doesn't get to speak? Kanye froze mid-stride. The question hung there, heavier than all his accusations. Jasmine didn't wait for an answer. She turned toward the wings of the stage and gave a subtle nod. From the shadows, a young girl stepped into the light, barely 16, her small frame swallowed by an oversized sweater and nervous eyes that blinked under the glare. Her hands trembled as she held the mic Jasmine passed to her. The stadium didn't recognize her, but Jasmine did, and so did the folder. This is Aaliyah, Jasmine said, hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. She applied for a scholarship from Donda Futures. She was accepted, promised a full ride. Then the program vanished. No explanation, no refund, no answers. Aaliyah's lips quivered, but she took a breath. I thought it was my way out, she said, her voice shaking. They told me I had talent, that I was the future. I told my grandma I was going to college because of Mr. West. She paused, swallowing hard. Then one day I got an email saying the program was paused, that the funding was gone. I called. I emailed. No one responded. And then I saw a video of a yacht party posted the same weekend I was supposed to move into the dorms. She broke. Her hand flew up to her face and her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. The audience didn't cheer, didn't clap. They just watched, frozen, gripped by the weight of a story too real to perform. Jasmine didn't look at Kanye. Not yet. She waited until Aaliyah handed back the mic, wiped her tears, and stepped gently into the background. Then, and only then, did Jasmine turn. "You talk about unity," she said, her voice a controlled burn. "But unity without truth is just silence dressed up in chains." She stepped forward. "You keep saying I'm dividing us. But I didn't lie to that girl. I didn't promise her a future and then disappear behind a hashtag. You did." Kanye's expression cracked. He opened his mouth, or then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Nothing that wouldn't sound like an excuse. "You want to talk about being silenced?" Jasmine asked. "Try being a black girl who does everything right. Studies, sacrifices, believes, and then gets abandoned by the man who said he believed in her. That's what silence really is, Kanye. And it doesn't sound like cancel culture. It sounds like a voicemail that never gets returned." The crowd didn't move. They didn't breathe. They were no longer watching a debate. They were witnessing a reckoning. And in that moment, the loudest man on the stage, the man who had always relied on sound to drown out contradiction, stood utterly, helplessly quiet. There was no cue, no dramatic swell of music, no triumphant fanfare or closing monologue. Just a silence so deep, so absolute, it felt like the arena itself had stopped breathing. Kanye stood center stage, eyes cast downward, his shoulders rigid but somehow small, like the weight of everything said had finally settled on him, and for once, he couldn't outrun it. The crowd waited for something, another outburst, another spin, another distraction, but none came. Because across from him, Jasmine Crockett had already made her final statement, not in words, not in shouts, but in presence, in truth, in stillness. She looked at him one last time, not with anger, not even with pity, but with the resolute calm of someone who had carried the weight of her people into hostile rooms before. Then she turned. No bow, no wave, just a single, deliberate pivot. Her heels tapped the stage like the beat of a gavel, and she walked away, shoulders straight, eyes forward, spine unshaken. The exit lights caught the curve of her silhouette, outlining her in gold as she crossed into shadow. She didn't look back. The cameras caught everything, and so did the world. Within minutes, the clip hit TikTok, a 7-second video titled, "She Walked." He stood still. No music, no captions, just Jasmine's retreat, Kanye's silence, and the hum of a stadium too stunned to react. It exploded. 3 million views in an hour, 17 million by midnight. Comment sections filled with stunned silence, broken only by variations of one phrase. She didn't flinch. The hashtag followed, like wildfire on dry leaves. So she didn't flinch. Then, # Crockett versus Kanye. By morning, both had cracked the #1 spot on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube simultaneously. Global trend. Translated, reposted, memed, immortalized. There were no fireworks, no shattering glass. Just that image. A black woman walking away from the wreckage of power without a single word and without losing an inch of herself. No victory speech, no gloating. Just silence that said, you don't need to yell to win. You only need to stand long enough for the truth to echo. Backstage, the producers sat slack-jawed in their headsets. One whispered, Did that just happen?" Another tried to cue the outro music, but paused mid-button press. Nothing they could have scripted would top that final image. Not in 1,000 rehearsals. It wasn't television. It was history. Meanwhile, Kanye still hadn't moved. He stayed on stage, mic loose in hand, eyes on the floor. Whatever script he'd prepared, whatever redemption arc he thought he was writing, it had been rewritten in real time by a woman who never raised her voice. And in that stillness, it was he who looked lost. A king without a crown, a messenger without a message. Across the country, newsrooms scrambled. Cable news ran the clip on loop. The moment America paused, Jasmine Crockett's silence louder than any Kanye rant. Think pieces dropped like rain, some praising her discipline, others analyzing his unraveling. Editorials asked, has the era of volume finally ended? While the world argued, one thing remained clear. Something had shifted. Even those who once doubted her, who called her too polished, too polite, too scripted, now saw the strategy. She didn't walk out with fire. She walked out with control. And in doing so, she reclaimed what so many Black women are too often denied on public stages: dignity in defiance. In the days that followed, the clip was dissected, studied, slowed down frame by frame. Artists painted murals of the moment. Poets wrote sonnets. High schoolers shared it in civics classes. A university professor called it the most important nonverbal act of resistance broadcast this decade. And Jasmine? She said nothing. She issued no statement, didn't retweet the praise, didn't book interviews. She simply returned to Washington, sat in a quiet office, and went back to work. Because for her, it was never about performance. It was about making silence impossible to ignore. For 14 days, Kanye West vanished. No tweets, no Instagram rants, no paparazzi sightings. The man who had built a career out of being seen, loud, wild, unapologetic, simply disappeared. Fans speculated he'd gone off-grid. Conspiracy theories circled like vultures. Rehab, Africa, Wyoming. Even TMZ couldn't find him. And in the absence of his voice, the noise only grew louder. Cable news spun 1,000 takes a minute. Some labeled Jasmine Crockett a political assassin, a master manipulator who had used the stage to publicly execute a cultural icon. Others hailed her as a modern Harriet Tubman, cutting through lies with truth instead of chains. Podcasts across the spectrum lit up with debate. Did she go too far? Did he deserve that? What does this mean for Black America's future? Every rapper, activist, professor, influencer, and keyboard warrior had an opinion, and none of them could agree. A prominent journalist tweeted, "This wasn't a conversation, it was a crucifixion." A civil rights leader replied, "No, it was a resurrection of dignity." Even Snoop Dogg chimed in, "Crockett didn't roast ye." She reminded him who the fire belonged to. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained still. She gave no interviews, no op-eds, no Instagram lives. When asked by a reporter outside the Capitol what she made of the media storm, she only said, "I didn't come for headlines, I came for the truth." And when pushed for more, she gave a line that would echo through newsrooms like thunder. "I don't want to destroy anyone. I just want to clear the path." That quote made the front page of the New York Times under the headline, "Crockett, the clean sweep." But still, no sign of Kanye. Until day 15. At 7:12 a.m., an unverified Twitter account posted a grainy, low-lit photo. No caption, no watermark, just a single image. Kanye West sitting alone in a small recording studio, hoodie pulled low, notebook in lap. Behind him on a whiteboard were 6 words written in thick black marker: "Silence isn't weakness." I get it now. The internet exploded. Within an hour, the photo was everywhere. CNN ran a segment analyzing the handwriting. TikTokers broke down the lighting and the mood. Fans posted tributes, while critics called it damage control. But the effect was undeniable. The noise slowed. The fire cooled. Something had changed. And not just for him, for the culture. For the first time in years, Kanye didn't try to spin the story. He surrendered to it. Jasmine saw the photo while boarding a flight to Dallas. Her aide leaned in, showing her the screen. She looked at it for a long moment, then nodded once, quietly. She didn't smile, didn't comment, didn't repost. Later that night, a journalist called for a quote. She gave them 5 words. "Sometimes growth looks like quiet." The next day, a mural appeared in Atlanta. 2 figures painted in sweeping brushstrokes. Jasmine Crockett in profile, eyes forward. Kanye West behind her, not speaking, but listening. Between them, those same 6 words scrawled across the concrete wall. "Silence isn't weakness." I get it now. And beneath that, in smaller script, "Let the truth speak." The moment wasn't just viral, it was transformative. Because for the first time in a long time, the conversation wasn't about who was loudest, it was about who was listening. She had waited in line for 5 hours, clutching her mother's hand, her small fingers wrapped tightly around a worn journal and a ticket with creased edges. She was only 11, barely tall enough to see over the railing at the front of the stage, but her mother insisted she come. "You need to see what it looks like when a black woman doesn't flinch." So she came, quiet, wide-eyed, hair pulled back in a careful braid, with a notebook tucked into her hoodie that already held too many questions about the world. That night, as the lights burst and the crowd swelled with noise and tension, she sat motionless in the front row, watching, listening, breathing every moment in like a storm about to change her life. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the stakes. She saw how Jasmine Crockett didn't match fire with fire. She saw how Kanye rage pointed, circled like thunder, and how Jasmine never moved, not once. She didn't tremble, didn't shout. She stood like a monument, like the stone they couldn't crack. And the girl, her name was Layla, felt something inside her begin to burn, not with anger, but with clarity. It was the kind of clarity that doesn't scream. It listens. It remembers. After the event, the world exploded. Everyone around Layla seemed to have something to say. The car ride home was filled with radio commentators dissecting the debate, some cheering, some accusing. Her mother just shook her head and said, "That wasn't a debate. That was a lesson." But Layla didn't speak. She just opened her notebook and began to write. She wrote about the moment Jasmine walked off stage in silence, how the world froze, how thousands of people, adults, influencers, politicians, news anchors, were caught off guard by a woman who didn't need to shout to be heard. Layla scribbled the phrase over and over. She didn't flinch. Then she wrote something else, something that would, days later, end up taped to the door of her school's main office, shared by her teacher on Facebook, and eventually published in the Washington Post's Youth Voices section. She titled it, "This is for the girl who never thought her silence could be power." In it, Layla wrote, "I used to think being loud was the only way to be strong, that if you didn't raise your voice, you'd get buried. But tonight I saw something different. I saw a woman who didn't yell, who didn't cry, who didn't run. She stood there and made a whole stadium listen, not because she was loud, but because she refused to be moved. She didn't fight for the microphone. She let the silence carry her strength. And for the first time, I believed I didn't have to change who I am to be powerful. I just have to stand." The essay was passed around classrooms. Teachers read it aloud. Parents shared it in church bulletins and school newsletters. Jasmine Crockett herself read it on the Senate floor a week later during a debate on education funding. She never named the author. But when she finished, she looked up and said, "Some voices don't need volume. They need space." Layla's classmates started leaving sticky notes on her desk that said things like, "You're a rock star," and "You write like fire." But Layla didn't want to be a celebrity. She just wanted to be heard, and Jasmine had shown her how. Not through performance, not through spectacle, but through stillness that shook the ground. The final image in the video was quiet. Just Layla sitting at her desk, finishing her essay by hand, the words steady even as her fingers trembled slightly. The screen faded to black. And then a single question appeared, written in white font against the silence. "In a world where everyone wants to shout, would you dare to speak like Jasmine Crockett, with silence that cannot be ignored?" Fade to black. End of story. But the echo, it had only just begun. But even after the lights dimmed, after the hashtags cooled, after the headlines moved on to the next scandal, something lingered, not just in the minds of those who watched, but in the quiet corners of their conscience. It wasn't the data Jasmine revealed. It wasn't the standoff with Kanye. It wasn't even the viral silence. It was the way that little girl in the front row saw it all unfold. Because in a world addicted to spectacle, it was her eyes, not her phone, that recorded the moment that truly mattered. And in that breath between chaos and calm, we saw what power looks like when it doesn't roar, but stands still. What this story leaves us with isn't just drama, it's demand. A demand to reevaluate what we call leadership, to re-examine who gets heard and who gets hunted for daring to be calm in the face of the storm. Jasmine Crockett didn't just survive an ambush in front of millions. She redefined the rules of battle. Because when the world told her to scream, she chose stillness. When the crowd begged her to strike back, she stood taller. And when a man who once stood for freedom became the architect of confusion, she answered not with fury, but with fact, with lived truth, with presence. That kind of restraint isn't passivity. It's a form of resistance we've forgotten how to recognize. The kind that doesn't just challenge noise, it shatters it. There's a brutal irony in what Jasmine faced. She was told she was too quiet to lead, too composed to care, too polished to be real. And yet, in a room full of chaos, hers was the only voice that could not be denied. It's the same irony faced by women like her every day. Expected to be strong but punished for showing strength. Expected to be calm but erased when they don't perform anger the way the world prefers. It's a rigged performance, a stage designed to consume their dignity and call it debate. But Jasmine rewrote the scene. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't fight for airtime. She let her silence pierce through decades of stereotypes with more force than any viral soundbite ever could. And the injustice? It wasn't just in the lies she exposed or the funds that vanished. It was in the way her credibility was questioned before she ever opened her mouth. It was in the way she was framed as the system simply because she navigated it better than her critics. It was in the way the burden was always on her shoulders, not just to prove Kanye wrong, but to carry an entire community's hope without tripping once. And when she didn't fall, when she didn't break, when she didn't yell, people called it strategy. But maybe it was just survival. Maybe it was just another black woman doing what black women have always done, standing in the fire and refusing to burn. If this had been just another shouting match, it wouldn't have lasted beyond the weekend. But it wasn't. It was a reminder that courage doesn't always come wrapped in fire. Sometimes it walks in quietly, unfolds a folder, and dares the world to look. And sometimes the most radical act a person can perform in a broken world is to stay still. Jasmine's silence wasn't weakness. It wasn't submission. It was steel. It was protest. It was the final word in a room built to drown her out. And yet, the lesson here isn't just Jasmine's. It's ours. Because how many of us have shouted over each other so long, we've forgotten how to listen? How many of us measure conviction by decibels rather than by truth? How often have we dismissed someone's calm as cowardice when it was actually the hardest choice in the room? And more urgently, what will we do the next time someone stands in silence? Not because they have nothing to say, but because they know some truths are too sacred to scream. Layla's essay, tucked into a school bulletin, shared across kitchens and classrooms, wasn't just a tribute, it was a question. This is for the girl who never thought her silence could be power. That line didn't just echo through halls, it opened doors. It reminded us that visibility isn't volume, and that dignity doesn't require an audience to matter. The young see what we forget, that silence can be its own storm, that walking away can be louder than staying, that presence, unapologetic, unshaking, unyielding, can move more than speeches ever will. And what of Kanye? And what of Kanye? The man who once believed his mic could rebuild the world came face to face with something he couldn't remix: accountability. His absence from the noise wasn't surrender. It was a slow, painful reorientation toward humility. The whiteboard message, "Silence isn't weakness. I get it now," wasn't an apology. It was a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, it reflected the beginning of something not fixed, but aware. And that awareness, that willingness to stop talking and start listening, isn't defeat. It's a beginning we rarely allow our icons to reach. Jasmine didn't destroy him. She gave him a moment of stillness. What he does with it isn't hers to decide. So what do we do now? Do we scroll past the silence? Do we wait for the next scandal to numb our memory? Or do we carry this still, sharp, silent story with us as proof that strength doesn't always shout, that clarity doesn't always wear a crown, and that sometimes the most powerful woman in the room doesn't raise her voice. She just refuses to lower her standards? And if you're wondering if this story really happened exactly like this, if these words were said, If these moments truly unfolded as perfectly timed as they now appear, know this: whether born of fact, reflection, or the echo of what could be, stories like this carry something deeper than details. They carry a truth we recognize in our bones, a truth that doesn't need permission to exist. Because what matters isn't whether every second happened exactly this way. What matters is that we felt it. What matters is that the silence rang louder than the noise. What matters is that someone like Jasmine Crockett stood still, so the rest of us could finally hear ourselves think. And if the silence still lingers in your chest, if you're still sitting there, not blinking, not breathing, wondering why a single woman's quiet walk shook more ground than 1,000 shouts, then that means you felt it. Not just the injustice, not just the fire, but the balance she carried in that moment, like walking a tightrope above generations of pain, with every step watched, every breath measured, and every misstep pre-written in someone else's script. Jasmine Crockett didn't come to prove anything. She came to remind us that truth doesn't need armor, that dignity doesn't need applause, and that sometimes the most powerful blow is walking away without losing yourself. Now it's your turn to carry that silence forward, to lift the weight of this story and ask yourself, where do I stand when the room tilts against justice? Do you speak? Do you scroll past? Do you shout with the crowd? Or do you stop, listen, and stand still when it matters most? If this story reached you, if it cracked something open, then it's not enough to feel it. Share it, amplify it. Let someone else hear what silence sounds like when it speaks through courage. Every comment, every share, every click is not about numbers. It's about making sure this kind of story isn't the exception. It's about honoring what too often goes unseen, the quiet heroism of those who fight not with fists, but with presence. Subscribe to this channel if you believe stories like Jasmine's deserve more than a moment. They deserve a movement. Tap the bell not for updates, but for reminders of who we are when we choose to see clearly. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in her place? What does silence mean to you now? Your voice matters, not because it's loud, but because it's real. This is not the end of her story, and it's not the end of yours. It's just the moment you decide what to do with the truth. Thank you for staying till the end. Your time, your heart, your presence matters more than you know. If this story spoke to you, speak back. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let's keep this conversation and this fight alive.